Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second of our Facebook Live events, where I, Lisa Townsend, your Police and Crime Commissioner, along with Gavin Stevens, Chief Constable, Nev Kemp, Deputy Chief Constable, and my Deputy, Ellie Thompson, are here, and we're going to be taking your questions and talking about the issues that matter to you. So whether you're watching live or you're watching us after the event, you're very welcome. If you are watching live, please do feel free to submit your questions. Any questions that we don't get to this evening, we will make sure that we answer them later. So whenever you're watching this, please do feel free to get in touch with us. We have had quite a large number of questions already submitted in the lead up to the event, and we'll be going through as many of those as we can, and we will also try to take as many of your live questions as we possibly can. The areas of focus for this evening are road safety, engagement with young people, and supporting victims, and we'll come on to those and your questions a bit later on. First of all, for the formal bits, everybody here has seen the minutes from the last meeting and they have been approved. So moving straight on then to the performance report and progress against the police and crime plan. To give it some context, Surrey Police have already produced their regular high-level report, and you can find that on the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner website, where you can find all of the issues around performance. So Gavin, coming to first question. So around positive outcomes, recognising that it is very much a national problem and one shared by our immediate neighbours, solved outcome performance is quite stark in the performance report. And I was wondering if you could outline the initial benefits that we're seeing in the investigation improvement programme that might not yet actually be reflected in the statistics that we've seen.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Commissioner. I mean, I know you and I were at a community safety assembly earlier today with a whole range of colleagues across the county doing our best to keep the county safe. And one of the things that I said this afternoon was that the chances of getting justice for victims in Surrey is probably the lowest that I've known it in my career. And there's a whole host of factors behind that. But I guess the important thing is, as you ask, what are we doing to try and get more justice for more victims? So in the summer of last year, we started a programme on investigation improvement, and we wanted to put specific resource, particularly into domestic abuse and child abuse. So we created separate teams to do exactly that. And then in November of last year, we introduced neighbourhood police and investigation teams, so specific investigation teams to support local neighbourhoods. Really to get the sort of investigative skills where we need them to get a better return for people on the offences that they report to us. There's some real early signs of progress there. It's still early days, but I'll hand over to Nev Kemp, Deputy Chief Constable, in just a moment, who can give you some of those facts and figures. The other thing to say, of course, is as well as the investigation improvement plan, we continue to recruit at a really high rate. Over 460 new colleagues joined us in the last couple of years. We got another 260 plus colleagues joining us in the next year. All of that is really going to help, but of course it takes time to get the skills and training up, and we're investing heavily in that too. But in terms of immediate improvement, Nev, did you want to say a little bit about that?
Yes, thanks, Gavin. So one of the teams that was mentioned was the neighbourhood investigation team, and they deal with any prisoners that have been arrested by mainly our response officers, also some of our neighbourhood officers, and their solved outcome rate is averaging just over a third. So in 3 crimes they're bringing somebody to justice for, which is really good and really heartening. But the key element to improving our performance around that, because the Chief Constable said there is a lot of inexperience and new officers, is that we have a programme of secondments for those officers, those officers that respond to the emergency calls and the 101 calls into those teams, so that they get really good at dealing with prisoners, processing them, dealing with all the legal implications, building files, to give them more confidence and help them in understanding what investigative requirements are to solving more crime. So I'm really confident that we're going to see improvements, and in fact we are starting to see improvements. We're ambitious that Surrey, as well as being one of the safest, the 4th safest county in the country, is also certainly in the top quarter for bringing offenders to justice.
Yeah, thanks, Nev. And I guess the other thing, just to add to that, is that as part of the improvement plan, as chief officers and senior leaders in the force, we've all been dip checking investigations over recent months to sort of pick out themes of where we can improve performance. And we had an independent inspection earlier in the year where the inspectors do exactly that as well. There was actually some really positive feedback that'll come from that. The formal report will be out probably in just a few weeks' time, but it is getting scrutiny, not just from us as leaders, but from external partners as well.
That's great. Thank you both very much. And I'm sure that's a topic that both the public and I will be returning to over the coming months and years, as well as we see improvement continue. Now, moving on to the first of the priorities in my police and crime plan, which is violence against women and girls. And again, we know that there is a wider national concern and a national story around this. And I think the reasons around it have been discussed a lot. But perceptions of safety are notably down on previous reporting periods. And I wonder if you could outline how it's being addressed, particularly at a local level by borough commanders, and if you've got any examples of ways in which the force is addressing it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Commissioner. So I guess there are two things in Surrey that we really work hard to do, and that is to get a county that's safe in an objective way, low rates of victimisation and so on, but also a county that feels safe. And that perception of safety that you highlighted, it is down in recent months. So the particular question that we ask in an independent survey, a joint neighbourhood survey that we do with local authority partners and others, is whether people feel safe walking alone after dark. And we've seen that the figures in that have dropped from almost 80% down to just under 73%. So over a 6.5 percentage point fall through to December on those figures. Now, of course, there's been much more public dialogue about it, and we've been encouraging people to use the Street Safe app. So this is an online reporting tool where you can report places in your locality where you don't feel safe. What then happens is that the local neighbourhood teams will look at those reports, and you may have already seen on some of the local social media feeds where the neighbourhood teams put out updates about locations that are reported to them, and work that they then do, often in conjunction with local authority partners and others relevant to the area, to see what improvements we can make to make people feel safe after dark. Of course, it also informs our patrol plans as well. So if there are places, times of the day, days of the week, where you really want to see policing, then that can inform us too. I mean, a good example would be in Guildford Town Centre around the nighttime economy, and of course we hear very often, particularly from women on nights out, about their concerns around drink and drug spiking, really atrocious behaviour in the streets that makes them not want to come to town centres to have a night out. Guildford have worked very hard and have been successful, actually, I think 14 years in a row, getting a flag award for that sort of mixed nighttime economy where people are able to feel safe. And we really want to work hard to keep up that standard, because one thing that we really do rely on is these reports coming in. So if you haven't yet used that Street Safe app, you can just search it on any of the search engines, and it'll allow you to report any concerns into us. I guess just to finish off before I hand back, because where we do get repeat patterns of reporting, then, as you know, Commissioner, we work with your office and others to attract investment in. So the Basingstoke Canal would be a good example of that. Where we had repeat concerns reported in, managed to bid for some additional money for work to be done there. And I think, you be the judge of it as local residents and let us know what you think. But from the team's perspective, we feel we're already starting to see some improvements there.
Yeah, that's great, and there has been some fantastic work done down there. I visited a couple of weeks ago with some of the officers down there, and it's really, really good to see, and hopefully the public will see the change really soon. Looking at DA victims, domestic abuse victim satisfaction, I wonder if there are any comments that you'd like to make on sort of the sort of downturn that we've seen in that, and why that might be.
Yeah, sure. I mean, domestic abuse is one of our top priorities in policing, and it's not going too far to say that it really is a sort of epidemic in society. The volume of reports that we get and the numbers of serial perpetrators that we know that we deal with. So On our books alone, there are something like 900 serial perpetrators. We've worked hard to bring that number down. When we first started recording sort of repeat perpetrators of domestic abuse, it was around the 1,000 mark. Of course, I'll caveat this because these are just the ones that we know about, and we know that when we talk to our brilliant outreach providers across the county, offering support services to survivors of domestic abuse, that there are many more reports that don't come to policing attention. On the satisfaction figures, although we did see a downturn, actually in the latest figures, we've started to see a little upturn again in those figures, and they are still at relatively high levels. And by that I mean into the sort of 80%. But often one of the things that victims and survivors will tell us is that one of the key things is being kept informed about what's happening to their investigation, and particularly with the delays that we see in the courts and the overall criminal justice system, getting files compiled and cases before courts. We know that our victim and witness care unit have to work extraordinarily hard, particularly when there are last minute changes in keeping people up to date and informed. The one thing I would say about that is that you know, if you're in this situation and we are currently investigating a case that involves you or somebody that you know, please do give us your feedback, because that feedback does go back to individual officers concerned, and that often gives us an opportunity to take corrective action and get things back on track if you feel that it's drifting.
That's great, thank you. Moving on to sort of stalking, which we know is a problem and something that Surrey Police, I know, and others have been working really hard to help and rectify. We're seeing initial police referrals into Surrey's new DA and stalking perpetrators programmes are quite low. Are we confident that officers are aware that's there and they know what the channels are and they're able to refer people?
Not as aware as we would like them to be. So an awful lot of work gone on to understand stalking better, to up our levels of training on it, and to the intervention programme about concessive and compulsive sort of obsessive behaviour, and the programme that goes with that. We really do want to see more interventions in there. I campaigned for quite a long time to get behaviour change programmes, both for stalking and also for domestic abuse perpetrators, and we need to use them more. So I know the team have been really working hard as part of our training sessions to raise awareness with them, and particularly recently within the custody environment. I mean, you know, Neva's deputy was just talking a few minutes ago about those dedicated investigation teams in custody, where we can really get the levels of knowledge and awareness up to get those referrals in. Of course, these programmes do still require sort of voluntary engagement, but it's incumbent on us to get levels of awareness up and get as many referrals in as we can, because I mean, I know it's stepping away from stalking a little bit, but if we talk about the number of repeat perpetrators in domestic abuse, you know, nearly 900 as we know, not all of those are going to be resolved through the court system. So doing behaviour changes is really, really important. And I think the other thing to say on stalking is that sometimes I know when investigators take on these reports, victims and survivors often didn't know that they were being subject to this sort of behaviour. So if it is repeated, if it is unwanted, if it does become compulsive and obsessive, then it's more than likely stalking. And for us, that's a high risk offence that we really want to know about. So please do come forward and report, or if you know it's happening to somebody else, then encourage them to report too, and we are here to support you.
Yeah, that's great, and absolutely, I always encourage people to report. I know there is so much work going on in Surrey Police around that. Finally, on this issue, we know that Sussex are using their local stalking perpetrator provision as a mandated condition of stalking protection orders. Is that something that Surrey Police has considered? Yeah,
we're certainly open to consideration on that. I saw an update from the teams just recently on it, and we work very closely in partnership with Sussex, so we look to see what sort of benefits and returns that we've got on that. We've not moved to that stage yet, but certainly open-minded if that's the right way to do, and if all of the training and awareness that we're doing is not getting us the level of referrals that we need. But Nev, did you want to come in there?
Well, yeah, just to add really that the intervention programme is voluntary, and although that you could argue there's some coercion there if it was made a condition of the order, in order for it to be successful, the perpetrator's got to open up about their reasons for doing it and be willing to cooperate. So I think we need to understand better that balance. because at the moment all of those that are taking part have been doing so voluntarily, and the research shows it's much more likely to bear some fruit then.
Yeah. No, that's good. And behaviour change, I think, is what we all want to see ultimately, because that's going to be the best form of prevention. Moving on to protecting our communities, the report notes that there are high volumes of solved outcomes for burglaries in the first quarter of 2022, despite what I think we can all agree was a disappointing end to 21. Is it felt that the upsurge in solved outcomes is a direct result of investment in the area, or sort of simply or some unusual variations?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that I know Nev as deputies have been putting a lot of focus on through his performance meeting, particularly encouraging our proactive capability on divisions to put more time and energy on it. But Nev, did you want to pick up and say a little bit more about what the teams have been doing?
Yes, I mean, it's been rather than investment, more of a change of focus, really. So we've had, as you know, Commissioner, quite a difficult period with the pandemic, etc. And that had a big effect on crime patterns. It meant a lot of people were at home, so we saw burglaries reduce, and there was a lot of other activity that policing was involved in. Now that we've come through that, we are sadly starting to see a bit of an increase in burglary. More criminals are out and about, but at the same time, we have been able to increase our proactive capability right across the force. Because officers that were doing other things in relation to the pandemic now, we do have back with us, and one of their primary focuses is in relation to burglary of people's homes, which is an awful crime and has a tremendous impact on the victims and often their families. And so we are putting effort into not only targeting local criminals, but also those that we know from organised crime groups. Surrey has a pretty good road network. We obviously border London, and we know that we have quite a lot of, about half our criminality coming into the county comes from outside, and we're using every single bit of intelligence that we get to try and tackle that. So what I say to people is, if you do have any intelligence relating to burglary, anything suspicious, if you let us know, that then we do have the means and the ability to be able to respond to that. One of the other things that we found very difficult to do, along with a number of other forces during the pandemic, was visit prisons. So when we arrest and have somebody awaiting going to court and they're on remand in prison for burglary, what we couldn't do during the pandemic, because the prisons were locked down, was go and visit them to put to them a number of other burglaries we think they may have been responsible for. And quite often that bears fruit, because what the offender wants to do is clear their decks, really, so that they know they're not going to come back out and get arrested for something else. We weren't able to do that during the pandemic because we couldn't get into the prisons. We're back doing that sort of thing now, and it's important because that information then goes before the judge, and also it allows us to go back to victims and say, we have identified the person that burgled your house, which does give them some solace.
Yeah. I think there's one other area of investment that I think will help us with burglary and other offences as well, that we've been able to do through the uplift in officers and the increase in local taxation as well, which is to introduce a digital investigation support unit. So increasingly now, digital forensic evidence forms part of investigations, and having that specialist unit, developing those specialist skills, I'm confident will see us be able to detect more burglaries and other types of offences in future.
Yeah, great. Well, no, that's really good to hear, and I know that the public who are really concerned, understandably, about burglary, will be pleased to hear that. And I know it's something that we'll keep talking about because it is really important. It's great to see that the really good work that's happening. And
I should say we don't give up with burglaring people's homes. I mean, if you look at the current trial that's been going on with Ashley Cole, which sadly happened in Surrey, it took us months to identify that offender. Months of work, but we did it working with other forces, and that shows, I think, the tenacity. Had nothing to do with the fact it's actually cold. It was the awful nature of that offence, and that's the bar that we apply to that crime type. Great, that's really good to hear. I'm sure the public will be pleased as well. Recognising that Surrey is already undertaking work to better understand the impact of drug and gang-related crime in Surrey,
Do we have any sense of what proportion of reported serious violence is as a result of that versus the nighttime economy?
A really interesting question. I don't have sort of facts and figures in front of me today to be able to respond accurately to that, but happy to sort of take that away, and either one of the team can update in the chat panel, or we can come back to it later. But I guess there's a few sort of comments on it. First of all, of course, with serious violence, we know, and we've picked up on domestic abuse already this evening, that sadly one of the places where we see serious violence is within the home. So you know, that is absolutely top of our agenda, to tackle serious violence in the home. On the streets, after the pandemic restrictions were lifted, we certainly saw an uplift in serious violence offences with injury. So we obviously had a quiet time with that during the pandemic, and certainly we've had a busy time with offences associated with the nighttime economy rising. On the drugs point, we know that county lines in particular, so this is drug supply lines coming from major conurbations into Surrey towns and villages, often exploiting vulnerable people, sometimes criminally exploiting children as well, can come with a high level of violence. So we do sadly see on Surrey streets serious violence offences where weapons are used, often to enforce drugs debts or to coerce people in supporting those drug supply lines, and we take that extraordinarily seriously. Some good news on that front, in that since we set up a dedicated operation to tackle county lines drug supplies, we've now taken out over 160 county lines activity. But the one thing that I'd say about this is drugs is driven by money, yes, and by criminals exploiting the vulnerable, yes, but also by usage. And if there weren't as many people across Surrey buying and acquiring drugs through your mobile phone application or through that text message arrangement that you've got, then it wouldn't be bringing violence to our streets in Surrey in the same numbers that it is. And I think often recreational drug users don't necessarily think about the consequences on that vulnerable child, or the violence that's meted out on somebody that perhaps hasn't paid the debt that they owe to the dealer.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, a topic that comes up frequently when I'm in resident meetings, and I'm sure that you're asked about it a lot as well, and I know a lot of work is going on there, is catalytic converter theft.
Yeah.
And we have seen a rise in catalytic converter theft, and of course we saw that violent incident, which was very sad. What can you sort of tell the public to reassure them? Because I know there is some great work going on. Can you update the public on the work that is happening in order to tackle this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Nev and I have been very exercised about this in the office. We've had a number of conversations, particularly where we've seen those violent reports come in, and we know that there's been some really quite serious attacks from members of the public who've done the brave thing to try and intervene and prevent offenders, and we've seen them injured as a result of that, and that is really totally unacceptable. It is, if catalytic converter theft in itself wasn't bad enough, to have gangs that are prepared to mete out violence. So this is really important to us. We have had success in the past where our serious and organised crime teams have worked with the local neighbourhood policing teams and good communications campaigns to drive this down, and we're determined to do that again. But nevertheless, we're going to say a little bit more because we've got some dedicated investigation leads on that.
Yeah, we have. So we've reinstated an operation that we had before. In fact, it's been recognised nationally as really good practice, called Operation Blink. And as part of that, we've got coordinated investigation teams, response plans, increasing the speed and the early investigative inquiries of response right across the county. So if anybody contacts us saying that they're suspicious, there's some activity going on with the vehicle that causes them concern, our response is much quicker, and the officers will be using body-worn video and all sorts of things, automated number plate recognition, very early on in the investigation to try and identify the offenders. We're also doing more preventative work. and just at the end of last month, we arrested 4 who we think are responsible for a number of offences. We're also working quite closely with Thames Valley Police and the Metropolitan Police, both who've seen an increase as well. We know that most of our offenders are coming from outside Surrey, but I think it's fair to say that amongst the forces in the region, we're leading the way in our response. We're using all of the good practice that we've used previously. So I'm optimistic that we will reduce the problem and that we will get some people into court for it.
Great.
Yeah, and please, if you see this activity, dial 999. We're always grateful for brave members of the public trying to prevent crime, but just that word of caution with some of these gangs. So if you're on your own, think carefully about intervening and just pick up the phone and dial 999.
Yeah. Thank you. The last then section before we go on to take some of your questions around our area of focus. So looking at the relationship between Surrey Police and residents, which we know is incredibly important and I know matters to both of you. Public confidence in our ability to address cybercrime seems to be an ongoing issue for the force, and I don't think it's just in Surrey where we see the problem. Is it a case of a mismatch between expectations and the practicalities of actually dealing with it and bringing offenders to justice? Do you think there's some confusion over the role of the police and action fraud? And what can we do to reassure the public?
Yeah, so a really great question that. And when we think about cybercrime, I guess from a policing point of view, we think about 2 different types. So there is crime that wouldn't be possible if it weren't for online technology. So absolute cybercrime, as it were, and then there's cyber-enabled crime. So crime that's always happened. It's just that the use of the internet and technology makes it easier. Most investigations that we do now have some element of online investigation, digital footprint to them. That's just the way of the world. But of course, there are some crime types that really take advantage of the internet to prey on the vulnerable. So if I was to just pick one example of that, fraud, or if you want to take an even smaller subset, romance fraud. Victims of romance fraud can suffer huge losses, and it's perpetrated by really manipulative and clever individuals. And you will know this from yourself when even just those cold calls or those spam text messages. The offending groups are really quite clever in the sort of behavioural science they use to try and get us to click or to try and get us to keep that conversation going on the telephone. They're difficult but not impossible offences to investigate, and you may have seen we have had some successful cases through court, and we've got some excellent detectives that specialise this, that have done sort of national TV coverage on the work that we're doing. But the main thing I think now with cybercrime, cyber-enabled crime, is to take the prevention of it as seriously as we do physical prevention. So we're all very aware of the physical security that we might want around our homes or our businesses and offices and so on, and we need to be equally well aware about the prevention in cybercrime too. There are lots of online resources that you can use for that. I mean, if you just put in any search engine, you will get some of the national advice that's capable through that. And if you're a small business, for example, through our regional team, then we do offer some services where we can come out and speak to groups of small businesses to help protect themselves. And likewise, if you've been a victim of a fraud, like a romance fraud, then we have officers that can work directly with you to show you how to keep your online presence safe too as well. So it's very much a prevention focus. On action fraud, I know there's been lots of national commentary on action fraud about whether people feel that it's actually taking any action and help them. And the one thing that I'd say there is that what action fraud is, although people reporting might not feel that they're getting sometimes the quality of service that they would want as an individual, what action fraud are really good at is picking up big national trends and patterns in the vast volume of reporting that comes to them, and then taking action at a national and often an international level with National Crime Agency and others to take out some of these large-scale fraud operations at source, and often that can be overseas.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then I've got one more question before we move on to public questions and our areas of focus, which is around Grade 1 response times, which we've seen slips. Now, recognising that Grade 1 volumes have sort of returned to more sort of normal levels, shall we say, post-COVID, do we anticipate an improvement in this area?
Yeah, we do. I mean, so if I clarify, when a call comes into us, an emergency call comes into us, we give it a grading, and a Grade 1 is that we're aiming to get there within 15 minutes. Of course, we always want to do that safely. We definitely do not want any other casualties on the road or to put anybody else at risk whilst we're trying to get to somebody in that emergency. And we have seen a decline by around sort of 5 percentage points. So to put that in context, about 6 in 10 we're getting to within 15 minutes. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a huge delay after that 15 minutes, and often we might be there in 16 or 17 minutes. But we set that ambition in order to get to you in an emergency. We have seen an increase in emergency demand, and that has a bearing on it. And of course, we try and get that balance right between allocating resources to emergency activity, but also giving follow-up often at scheduled times and agreed times. For example, with people reporting domestic abuse, they want to see us as a particular time, for example. So that sort of resource equation is always a bit of a juggle, but we definitely want to keep to our ambition and really get the people in an emergency. And you know, as I've said a couple of times this evening, if you don't have the experience that you would quite expect reporting to us, then please do let us know, because one thing that we can do in quite some detail is to look back at the recording of the call that you make to us. All of these emergencies are all recorded, to look at how it was assessed, to look at any delays in the system, in the allocation, and so on, where the resources were available at the time. And of course, you know, in the vast majority of cases, this is not officers that are responding from a police station. They're out dealing with another call or on the road somewhere, and making sure that we have the right distribution of resources is important to us too. The other thing that helps with that is that we've invested in recent years in vehicle telematics, so we can track where all of our vehicles are and look to get the right number of vehicles in the right place. So please do give your feedback if you've had an experience, good for good or for bad.
Great, thank you, Gavin. And we're now going to move on to our areas of focus, which, as a reminder, were selected by the Surrey public. And to remind you, the areas of focus this evening are around road safety, young people and youth engagement, and also around supporting victims. So if you've got any questions on any of those topics, please do feel free to pop them in now. So first of all, we're going to start with road safety. So the rollout of the new Vanguard road safety team, we know is at full pace, and I think is going to provide really great reassurance to the public, and it's something that I think I know our team and I'm really excited to see. And people do feel that roads are becoming increasingly dangerous, particularly post-pandemic. We're certainly seeing traffic. I know I'm seeing traffic on the M25 on my commute in the morning, back up to, certainly feels like pre-pandemic levels. Surrey Police, of course, isn't the first force to run this kind of initiative. It was done in North Yorkshire, who undertook a similar piece of work last year. Have these areas seen improvements in KSI data?
So KSI killed or seriously injured. So one of the things that we monitor around road safety is to look at all of those incidents where somebody is killed or seriously injured. And of course, a serious injury can be absolutely life-changing for people and their families. And that Vanguard team is tackling those contributory factors to those accidents. So, I mean, you may have seen some national news this week with one of the national leads who works on road safety, and particularly on speeding, talking about the way that the police service are more accurately recording speeding data now to give greater insight. And their prediction as the national lead is that we'll probably show from that new data collection that speeding is more of a contributory factor than we thought it was in the past, of course, as are drink and drugs and mobile phone usage and so on. So this team, which has come through additional money and support of Police and Crime Commissioner and local taxation, is to do exactly this. We're very early days with it, and of course it is in addition to some great teams that we already have. So under our road safety partnership, which is not just policing but with local authorities as well, we already issue in excess of 90,000 ticket enforcements each year from the systems across the county. That's the automated systems. so speed enforcement, the red X cameras on the motorway, that sort of thing. And in addition to that, we have fantastic community speed watch schemes as well, with huge numbers of volunteers involved in that. So if that's something that you would like to get involved in your area, then please do get in touch with the Commissioner's Office or direct with Surrey Police on that. And we have local casualty reduction officers as well that are able to listen to those local concerns. So just a few of the things that we do, but we look forward to seeing real benefit from the Vanguard team too.
Great, thanks very much, Gavin. And we go to Ellie now, who has been watching as the questions are coming in. Ellie, we have our first question from the public.
We do, we've got quite a lot on road safety. So the first one is from Nick in East Surrey. What are you doing to introduce updates on public submissions of evidence and specifically to increase prosecutions?
Yeah, very, very topical question. If you followed Surrey Police on Twitter in particular, you may have seen exchanges in recent days from a really active member of our local community who got in touch online and also wrote to us about exactly this issue. So the submission of evidence from cycle helmet cams, from dash cams and so on, about offending behaviour on the roads. I think it's fair to say that this was a great example where that sort of public scrutiny of what we're doing has lifted a stone on something that we can do better. So we've as a result of that contact, we've already looked at what other forces are doing, and Nev in particular has been looking at this over recent days, so I'll ask him to come in a second. But that footage is really, really valuable to us, particularly from an early intervention point of view. And we're well set up to be able to receive this sort of material now, because in the last few years we've invested in a digital platform for all digital evidence with Sussex Police and also Thames Valley and Hampshire Police, because as you can imagine, and I mentioned other types of investigation earlier, the volume of this type of material is expanding, almost week by week. So we've got to keep up with the time, and I think as we found out recently, we perhaps haven't moved fast enough with the times, and never done. Whether you want to update a little bit more on that?
Yes, yeah, thank you. So we're seeing just over 10% of the footage being passed to us from members of the public, and some of it's really good quality. And it's fair to say, as the chief said, that this has highlighted that we took an approach that was too risk averse, and actually there may be some defences, but the approach we're going to be taking now is that actually we're going to be looking to take some action, and that will extend from a warning letter to a notice of intended prosecution, depending on the nature of the evidence and the offence that gives us. The approach that had been taken was that without being spoken to by an officer, how could we prove or disprove the offence? Well, actually, that was a risk-averse approach, and we got that wrong. And that's going to change from now on. And we know that using mobile phone in a car is one of what we call the fatal 5 primary reasons that crashes happen on a road. So it is something that we take seriously, and I'm grateful for the feedback we've had. The gentleman who actually pointed that out to us has been invited in to see how we do make our decisions, and we've fed back to him exactly what we're going to be doing. We've had a very positive response from him and from others in the cycling community, and we welcome that. We want to work with you.
Brilliant, that's really good to hear. Ellie, got another question for us?
Yeah, there's lots on this and dash cams and submissions. Ian from Reigate says, can we have an Operation Snap to help with the to help enable submissions? The roads team can't be everywhere. And Martin from Elmbridge says, how are Surrey Police dealing with those complaints that are submitted via dash cam footage? And has there been an increase in reports and prosecutions as a result of those submissions?
So I think the answer to that is not yet. So we obviously have had some prosecutions from it, but I think what we've learned recently is we've not been as successful in Surrey as some other forces have. So we definitely want to learn from that. Whether that results in an operation like Operation Snap or an approach that best suits Surrey, we'll be certainly working on that over the coming weeks.
Okay, that's great. Ellie, you got one more?
Yep. I'm going to do a double one again. This one comes up quite a lot when Lisa and I are out and about, so it's a good one. So Nick from East Surrey says, what are you doing to tackle pavement parking and proliferation of yellow line parking? And sort of in line with that, Mark from Guildford says, why does Surrey Police do nothing about cars parked on pavements, forcing children and people with buggies to walk in the road?
Yeah, okay. We always get questions on parking. I'd like to put this in the context of all the other issues that we've been talking about this evening, from dealing with domestic abuse and child abuse, trying to get more people before the courts, dealing with killed and seriously injured and so on. Parking was decriminalised in 1991, and yet people still naturally turn to policing as the agency of first resort to deal with parking. It's not actually been a policing responsibility since the early 90s. It was passed over to local authorities. Officers can intervene if they believe it's a sort of dangerous or a willful obstruction, and of course then we'll try and locate the driver and get the vehicle moved and so on. And of course we can issue a fixed penalty notice in those circumstances, and if we end up having to seize the vehicle, then there's a big release fee of 150 quid and 20 quid a day if we have to store the car and so on. So there are consequences for people. But we will first look to local authorities who are given the powers and the resourcing to deal with these issues. If there's something particularly dangerous, then we're more than happy to work in collaboration with our local authority colleagues to try and help with it. But it's not predominantly a policing responsibility to deal with routine parking issues.
That's great, thank you. And it's something, as Ellie says, that we get asked a lot, including by councillors. So it's really good to have a clarification there. I've got one, and it's clear, I think, from everything that we've heard, that the public, really see robust enforcement generally as a really important part of successful roads policing. And I was out and about over the Easter weekend with some of our roads officers and some of the engagement and education programs that they do. I mean, can you give us a better sense of the direct benefits that we see from educational campaigns?
Yeah, sure. I mean, our campaigns, we do evaluations on the monitoring for the levels of engagement, but ultimately we're trying to get to that behaviour change as well. And I think we also need to see campaigns in the same light as some of the corrective courses that people go on. So, I mentioned the 90,000 or so prosecutions that are issued through the safety camera partnership. So that's in a typical year. In a typical year, there's also about 30,000 people go through the sort of those education programs, which of course is an intensive, education if you have sort of transgressed, as it were. But officers often at the roadside can take the key messages from those intensive educational sessions and do them there and then at the roadside. Sometimes playing back little clips of footage that they might have captured on their in-car video and so on. So motorists can see the behaviour for themselves, and that sometimes just in that moment, it's what needs people to really think about their behaviour. The other fantastic campaign and educational programme that we do is Safe Drive, Stay Alive, led by our fantastic colleagues in the fire service, but contributed to by policing and other emergency services and our health colleagues and so on. Across the county, and that is targeted at new drivers, predominantly sixth form age students. But of course, one of the things that they do is go home and remind their parents, who are there often passengers with, about driving behaviour. This stuff really does have an effect. But having said all that, Commissioner, as you were saying earlier, we have sadly started to see post-pandemic some increases in those killed and seriously injured statistics, which are life-changing. So I'd ask everybody to think about behaviour on the roads, think about being tolerant to others. We were chatting just a moment ago about the sort of dash cam footage, which often comes from cyclists, and that sort of cooperation on the road. Particularly, you've seen the publicity a couple of months ago about the changes to the highway code. And the sort of hierarchy of if we're motorists, particularly commercial motorists, and we do have a team that looks specifically at that. In fact, I saw some social media footage early today by the specialist team that target commercial vehicles to make sure they're safe on the road. We do have an increasing responsibility if we are motorists.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that Safe Drive Stay Alive programme is really important and makes a massive difference to young people, schools, and of course to their parents. And after 2 years online, it's finally back in person this year, and I would encourage everybody who is eligible to take part in it. And I know we saw a tragic death sadly over the weekend of a young person on the road. So anything that anyone can do to prevent that is really important. Ellie, back over to you for more questions around roads.
Yeah, we've got a lot coming in on speeding.
Okay.
So what are you doing to tackle speeding on A and B roads? Why are there not more speed traps or other speeding measures put in place, especially around schools and other high-risk areas? And what is being done to control speeding and stop excessively noisy cars, specifically in Godalming, where speeding, deliberate over-revving and backfiring from modified cars is a bit of an issue?
Yep. Okay. So on speeding, as I mentioned, there are an enormous number of prosecutions on that, sort of 90,000 a year on that, and that will cover some of the A road networks. On the B road networks, that's where we're reliant on those reports to come into the casualty reduction officers, so they can look at those sort of patterns and trends, put out monitoring equipment. In fact, on my sort of weekend run on Saturday morning, I ran past a location near to me where I could see that the team had put out monitoring equipment to do speed surveys, and that sometimes helps with the engineering changes that might be needed. And of course, people can give feedback to the Surrey County Council on the website on speed limits. And often local communities do come together to report concerns. The casualty reduction officers have a really good knowledge of the road network in their local area, and more than happy to work with local residents and community speed watch volunteers, which I touched on earlier, to help tackle those very localised issues. On the noise, we do the specialist teams now do have some noise monitoring equipment. Our experience, along with colleagues in Sussex as well, who've been leading the way on some of this work, is that the noise monitoring equipment is difficult to do on its own in isolation for prosecution, but often it adds to the evidence for the prosecution of events, or adds to the evidence in order to do a sort of roadside intervention around education work. So we can do specific operations in locations using the noise monitoring equipment as well as speed monitoring equipment.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. It's really important, and again, something that's raised frequently. I think we've got one more question around roads before we move on to young people.
It sort of links into young people.
Yeah,
so it's a good segue. Jeremy from Elmbridge, what do the police plan to do about illegal use of e-scooters and people who ride bikes on the pavement?
Yeah, okay. I'll take those as two sort of separate issues.
Yeah.
Sort of bike on the pavement, you'll see police use a lot of discretion on there, because there's a great deal of difference between somebody helping their child learn to ride in the local area that's actually not posing a risk to anybody but keeping the child safe while they learn to ride a bike, and somebody scooting down a pavement at inappropriate speed that's a risk to pedestrians. So with bikes on the pavement, you will see officers exercise their discretion, as I'm sure you would expect. With e-scooters, the legislation means that you need insurance and you need a driving license to use these things, and we do seize quite a number. In fact, I think in the recent 12 months we've seized 97 of these e-scooters, largely from people not having the insurance to use them. So we will take enforcement action against them. I think there's a broader question for us here as a sort of society and a community. I know there are trials going on at other places in the UK, and of course we're all looking for green, sustainable transport. And I think in future, small battery-powered vehicles are probably going to be what we're going to have to all adjust to. But at the moment, with the current legislation, we do take enforcement action. And if you're concerned, particularly if you see sort of patterns of behaviour with them being used in an antisocial way, and we do, for example, receive reports of them being used in drug running, for example, with some of that sort of county lines activity, then we definitely want to know, and the local teams can target particular areas so we can take that enforcement action.
Brilliant, thank you. And that does bring us, as Ellie said, quite nicely onto work around youth engagement. I know that our youth engagement officers have been going out and working really, really hard, and and Ellie, who has within the office deals with young people, I know has seen some of the great work they're doing. And there's also been some really good work that Surrey Police are doing, the Surrey County Council, around going into schools and developing around the PSHE curriculum, and really helping what has, I think, historically been quite a fragmented approach. One issue with school inputs has always been the extent to which sort of the messaging is retained and the legacy it leaves. And I just wonder whether you feel that the new approach, working sort of much closer, and the great work that's going on with the sort of junior citizenship and all of that work is going to help in schools.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, I'm really proud of the work that we do with policing and our relationship with children and young people across the county. I've for a long time had a phrase that the work that we do with children and young people is the only opportunity that we get to police the future. So, and I don't say that glibly, I really mean it, that if we build those relationships with children and young people across our county early, if they know what policing has to offer, then it really does help encourage good citizenship, long-term crime reduction, and the knowledge for people to be able to come to us at their time in need. Of course, there's always been a bit of a debate about how much educational input policing should do and what should be left, of course, to education professionals. We've got a really good working partnership now where we hope that we're getting that balance just right. Not just in line with our national sort of child-centred policing strategy, but also with the advice from educational professionals locally here. Whenever we do junior citizen or indeed recruitment events later in life, we always get wonderful stories from children and young people about how an early encounter with an officer in a safe environment, be it in a school or a youth group, was sometimes needed to get the advice or help them make a change in life. And it's not at all unusual for new recruits to tell stories, sometimes about officers that are still serving with them, about how they came into their school and it was that one conversation that encouraged them into a career in public service. So I don't think we can ever underestimate that time spent with children and young people.
Excellent, thank you, Gavin. And just as a reminder, if you've got any questions to ask the Chief Constable around engaging with young people or around victims of crime and how we support victims of crime, then now is your time to get them in. Ellie, questions around young people?
Absolutely. From Alex on Facebook. I understand that antisocial behaviour has increased around train station car parks, though British Transport Police have provided quick responses and effective solutions. What can be done to curb ASB generally in Surrey?
Another great question. So just to clarify that point with British Transport Police, so the policing of train stations is a responsibility of British Transport Police, but of course we work very closely with them around those sort of boundary areas. I remember doing a survey together with colleagues in education about those places where children and young people didn't necessarily feel safe. So we were talking earlier on in the session about the Street Safe reporting app, where particularly women and girls might be reporting areas in the county where they didn't feel safe. When we asked children that question, one of the themes that came up was transport hubs, be that bus stations or train stations, where they didn't feel safe. And sometimes they congregate in numbers in order to get that sense of safety, and them doing that can then sometimes present to adults using it that it's antisocial behaviour. So again, officers will always use their discretion here, because a group of young people gathering together to get that sense of collective safety is not necessarily antisocial. But of course, we all understand when the line is crossed, and we will work to take sort of corrective action there. Our approach is always to try and problem solve it. So one of the things that we try to do in Surrey Police is all use the same problem solving approach, and that's to gather as much information on the problem as we can, to work with as broad a range of people involved, including, say if it was a train station, the other users of the train station, the team that are staffing and managing that train station, the young people themselves that are perhaps gathering nearby, to try and find a solution that's sustainable. Of course, when we need to, we do have a whole range of enforcement powers, be it restriction orders for public spaces, be it behaviour orders against individuals involved. So there's a whole range of options available to us. But we'll always try and get together with local community, other users of that space, children and young people themselves, and try and navigate a route through that, so we don't have to use those enforcement powers and keep coming back to the same problem.
Okay, thank you. One more question. I think you have, Ellie, on youth.
Yeah, one from Ian in Reigate. Ian's concerned that from the comms he sees, the interaction for young people seems to be a message of just don't go to the park. He says, I hope it's more than that. Would things like bikeability courses and encouraging active travel for young people help? So I don't know if we want to talk a bit about sort of joined up working that happens.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and just on that comment about don't go to the park, I think that perhaps was a misunderstanding. So if we're talking about Reigate Priory Park, for example, we did have a series of reports about particularly problematic behaviour later into the evening, with groups of perhaps older children, teenagers, young adults, and it was the sort of activity around that was causing local residents and other park users some problems. So the team I know have been working hard on that with Reigate and Banstead Borough Council too, and I know that some CCTV was maintained in that location for that, but that is definitely not a generic message about don't go to the parks. We should all be going to the parks to get some good fresh air and green space. And of course reporting in concerns to us and local authorities if you feel that that's not the case. And sorry, Ellie, the second part of the question was
just about sort of joined up work that happens across the county. Just he's concerned that there's not much going on, and would schemes like bikeability and encouraging active travel help?
Yeah, I mean, so I know that one of our recently retired police colleagues has gone in exactly into volunteering into doing cycling proficiency schemes with children and young people. Of course, as they get older and want to do the bike schemes, absolutely. So if any of these schemes are a means for us to sort of help reduce antisocial behaviour, and we can do it not just with our full-time paid workforce, but with our fantastic range of volunteers as well. And we have a whole range of volunteering opportunities, be it in the special constabulary where you get the powers of a police officer, or through our police staff volunteers, for which there are many different roles. Then we're always open to ideas on that. So if the questioner's got thoughts about something there for their particular area, then please do get in touch with a little bit more detail.
And probably a great time to plug the cadets.
Great time to plug the cadets as well. So we have a wonderful cadet scheme for the sort of early teenage years, and we often see those cadets go on to become cadet leaders as well, and some of them come in to join policing and other public services. And of course, our fire service colleagues got a fantastic cadet scheme too. So lots of opportunities for children and young people.
Brilliant. Okay, and we're going to move on to the last area of focus, which is around how we support victims of crime. So this is your last chance. If you've got any questions for the Chief Constable, do get them in now. Ellie is watching very closely and we'll be asking your questions shortly. So Ellie, have you got a question for us that you want to kick off with around victims of crime?
Yeah, there's a big one coming in first. So someone's asking, as a victim of a hate crime, what support's available? And I've asked if we can potentially first speak to Gavin, and then if Lisa can update on what's available from the Commissioner's office as well.
Yeah, sure. Hate crime is one of those things. Of course, I should explain a little bit about what a hate crime is, in that you can be a victim of any sort of crime. So it might be a criminal damage against your property, or it might be a sort of public order offence, or a worst case a violent attack. But if it's motivated by hate, then that is something that the courts can take into account when they come to sentencing. And of course, if offending against you is motivated by hate, then it's highly likely that the perpetrator of that is not just targeting you as a victim of that crime, but perhaps others as well. And because from a policing point of view, we want to intervene as early as we possibly can when we see this sort of behaviour, because the last thing we want to see is for it to escalate and become really serious, or undermine somebody's quality of life on a day-to-day basis, because often hate crimes can be repeated as well. So we have a strong partnership with Stop Hate UK, which allows alternative ways of reporting, and we also have a hate crime lead for the force, and we do specialist training around that. But I know through the Commissioner's Office as well, there are also other support services available.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. So over £3 million from my office last year around victims of crime. And I think the important thing to point out is that covers all victims of crime. So it doesn't matter whether you've been a victim of whether it's domestic abuse or sexual assault, burglary, any kind of crime, of course, including hate crime. The support is there, and those services support anybody who's been a victim. And yeah, so getting in touch with either directly with Surrey Police or with the office, and we can always help point you in the right direction. Thank you for that, Gavin. And just on that, it's been really reassuring to see that our victim and witness care unit providing sort of such strong sort of care and support to to all victims across the county. And I know something that's very much sort of central to the unit and important for the unit. Given court backlogs though, and the increased demand that the delay places on those staff, and not something, as we know, that is not in our control, are we confident that the unit has the resource in order to be able to manage this?
We would always love more resource in victim and witness care. We have put some additional investment in for this year as we go through the recovery, and I guess the first thing I'd like to do is pay tribute really to all of the colleagues that work in that unit and the volunteers that we have that come in and support us doing victim and witness care too, because of course the pandemic has been an extraordinary strain on all sorts of services, hasn't it? But we know particularly on how the whole criminal justice system has been able to function smoothly, and there's lots still to recover in how that works, to get people court dates, to get cases before the court. We're already seeing signs of improvement with court listings, but there are still long delays and often last minute changes with listings and so on as well. So those victim and witness care officers work extraordinarily hard to try and keep people up to date and informed where they've got particular needs. So for example, in hate crime, to be able to refer on to the additional support agencies if it's needed too. So we have put some extra staff in there. We'd always like more. And of course, there are always, if this is something that you would like to come and support your local community on, and give support to those victims and survivors of crime as they approach what can sometimes be difficult court proceedings, then please do get in touch, because there's some great volunteering opportunities there too, which can make a real difference to helping witnesses, families, victims through those difficult months.
Yeah, and incredibly rewarding work as well.
Indeed.
For people. Ellie, you got more questions?
We've got more questions. This one sort of links to the previous question, but is more broad to than the specific victim. So someone in Elmbridge has asked, why are local residents not informed that they have an offender living amongst them when the offender has been subject to a community order and holds a position of responsibility?
Yeah, sure. So obviously when cases go before the court, if they're done in an open court, as of course the vast majority of them are, and convictions ensue, then that's in the public domain anyway, and often local media outlets will cover that. And if there are certain cases that are particularly high profile, have had particular public interest around them, then we often do proactive media releases to communicate those results, so that you can see the work that policing and other agencies have been doing to keep the county safe, and of course to warn you about some of those offending behaviours, and on occasions the actual perpetrator themselves. So there's that level of awareness. That of course is not done routinely for every offence, but it's done for those where we make a judgment that it's necessary in the interests of ongoing public safety. Of course, there are some disclosure schemes where we anybody can make requests under those schemes. Particularly, we've been talking, for example, about perpetrators of domestic abuse, and there's another scheme in relation to risks to children and young people as well. Those sorts of disclosures are done very carefully in conjunction with liaison officers within the local authority, to make sure that the information that gets to those individuals that need it in order to be able to help manage the risk. So for those sort of cases, it would not necessarily be a broader community awareness, because often that can sometimes lead to additional tensions or additional policing problems, or expose other risks. but we will do those disclosures where the circumstances are suitable to those people that need to know in order to help the individuals involved manage those risks.
Okay, that's really reassuring. Thank you, Gavin. Ellie, you've got some more.
I do. This was actually touched on earlier, and I know Nev specifically, you're doing quite a lot of work in this area. Neil from Reigate in Banstead wants to know, what's the police stance in Surrey in being more proactive in updating us on what's being done following up from a crime being committed?
So in relation to victims of crime in particular, one of the things we're pushing very hard is to make sure that if you are a victim of crime, you get timely and regular updates. We know that's one of the key areas that leads to greater satisfaction. So that's something we're working really hard on. And actually, not every force, you might be surprised to know, actually measures how satisfied victims are. We've ensured that we've kept doing that, and in fact we have a better way of doing that now. We've improved the data that we get so that we can identify at what point the victim is satisfied, and if they're not, at what point that happens, so we can pin it right down to teams or individual officers and staff. And that's really helping us understand how good, or at times not so good as we like, our performance is, because we believe that that's really important. In terms of updating the public more generally, we have a number of ways of doing that. Our communications team here have won awards for some of the innovative ways that they keep the public informed about the results of crimes and also crime patterns that are happening. But what I'd say is, if there are ways that you think that we should be doing it, we're missing a trick, because I often hear that we don't shout loudly enough about a lot of the good work we do, then please do tell us. A bit like the example we were giving earlier on about the gentleman who contacted us about us using dash cam footage. If you've got some really good ideas about how we can communicate with you and keep you informed, I'd love to hear them.
Great, thanks very much, Nev. It is your last chance to get a question in, if you have one. But Ellie, I think we've got a bit of time for a couple more.
Yeah, we've got quite a lot coming in. So just a quick reminder to everybody at home, if we don't get to your question, they will be taken and answered offline after the meeting, particularly if we're on a different topic that wasn't sort of focused on today. The next one comes in from Alex on Facebook. Does Surrey Police recognise misogyny as a motivation for sex-based crimes? She's noticed it's been debated in Parliament, so she's interested to know what the approach is from Surrey.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's been a big topic of national debate about whether misogyny should be recorded as a hate crime. So that's not currently how it is in legislation, but I know that the Law Commission and the Home Office were looking at this, and in policing terms, we follow the will of Parliament and national guidelines that are issued. There are some police force areas that have experimented with some recording around it, with the support of their sort of local charities and agencies that have described how that in those areas has helped send a really strong message, particularly to women in the community in the area, about how seriously police do take these reports. So at the moment, that's not our stance in Surrey. We sort of follow the national guidelines, but that's not to say that we don't take any sort of reports of hate extremely seriously. Now, there's a fine balance to take here, and Her Majesty's Chief Inspectorate of Constabulary has sort of reiterated the report, the annual report of his predecessor, where they talked about policing not being the thought police. So there's a clear line when sort of offending behaviour is crossed and it becomes a sort of breach of the law, as it were, and that's where we as policing have a responsibility to intervene. However, of course, in policing we want to spot early opportunities, and we know in some very serious offending behaviour that often escalates to levels of extreme violence. Sometimes those individuals, when we look back, had hate-filled social media profiles, were known in their local community for sort of hate speech, as it were, that didn't yet cross that line into transgression of the law. So it's still important in policing for us to know about these things and be able to put that information together with other intelligence and other community concerns, so that we hopefully don't miss opportunities when high-risk offenders can cross that line from speech into sometimes some quite violent activity. So it is a difficult balance for policing to strike, and I hope we strike the right one in Surrey. But of course, always interested in your views if you think we're the wrong side of the line. And of course, we know different people have different views and opinions on this too. So we do try and get the balance right.
Yeah, and it's a difficult one. The other one that comes to mind is sort of incel, some of the quite awful incel ideology that we've seen, unfortunately, coming across from America, and we know there was already at least one tragic case in the UK. So it's good to know that keeping a close eye on that. Ellie.
Yeah, if we can squeeze in 2 more, that would be lovely.
We can squeeze in 2 more.
It's a really interesting topic because the questions are so varied. The next one, I don't know who wants to take this one. Robert on Facebook asks, what's being done about the shortfall in back office staff within the criminal justice unit who process the summons, tickets and collision reports?
Okay, that's quite a detail. Was it from Robert?
It was from Robert.
Thank you, Robert. It's quite a detailed question. That it's not one that I know the answer to this evening, but more than happy to take that away and get that information to you. Although one thing that we mentioned the case earlier on about the sort of reporting using dash cams and helmet cams and so on, and I know that Nev, when we looked at that, the team have come back to us to talk about the resourcing that might be required for that. And indeed, we've started some dialogue with our road safety partnership as well as to how we may be able to resource that differently too. So more than happy to pick that up and take it away and have a look. And if Robert's got a bit more detail about an experience that's led to that question, then please do get in touch privately as well.
Great. Wonderful. And one more we'll squeeze in. And actually, this is something that comes up when we're out and about quite a lot. So I think it's a really helpful opportunity to maybe address the perception. Jonathan from Woking says, every time I go to the shopping centre in Woking, there's at least 15 police cars parked up. Why are these vehicles not out patrolling?
Yeah, sure. And I know we've seen a similar question, I think, online too, about the officers in Esher as well at Elmbridge. I think it's important to point out that the council officers are effectively our police stations now. So we're co-located with the local authority in a number of locations across the county. And because it's our police station, you're going to see police cars there. We have shift changeovers. We were talking earlier about the response times and having the sort of vehicle fleet necessary to do that. And there are times when there'll be significant numbers of vehicles parked at these places whilst we do that. The other thing I should say though is that we're always alive to try and get the best value for money out of the tax contributions that you give us. That vehicle telematics is one thing that we look closely at. We are going to have to make savings as Surrey Police over the coming years, some quite significant savings, and I know that one of the things on our list to look really carefully at is the size of our vehicle fleet, and to make sure that vehicle fleet is the right sort of mix of vehicles that we need as well. So for example, across Surrey and Sussex, we introduced 60 electric vehicles in recent years, and we've been evaluating the sort of duties that they're really effective for. We've trialled hydrogen and so on as well. Yeah, that's why they're police stations, but rest assured, we do look that we're spending money wisely.
Yeah.
It's probably just worth adding, the chief mentioned about telematics. So we are shrinking the size of our vehicle fleet, and what we found is where vehicles aren't doing enough miles, actually we're removing them from the fleet altogether, and we're going to keep doing that. So it's been a really useful tool in making sure that every vehicle provides value for money. So although you might see a number of vehicles parked up at certain times, what I can assure you is those vehicles are being used and used regularly, to make us ensure that we're as efficient as possible. And interestingly, actually, we removed some vehicles that some of our police community support officers were using in one part of the county, and they've been used more during the pandemic. There are obviously safety issues with using a vehicle. We've removed those, and actually it's encouraging those officers do a lot more foot patrol. There's been some really good feedback around that. So all the time we're trying to make sure that, one, we don't have too many vehicles, and two, we're getting best use out of them.
That's great. Thank you both. And Woking is my nearest sort of big town, and I think I know the car park. I think it's on Victoria Way that Jonathan's talking about. And I have to say, I always feel incredibly safe parking my car there. And if I'm on my own and it's after dark, it's somewhere I always feel very safe walking. So yes, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. That is all of the questions. But I am going to ask Gavin. We've got a really busy summer coming up. We've got the Jubilee weekend. We've got the Epsom Derby happening. Very exciting coming up in Surrey. On the Jubilee weekends. We've got a great summer of football, fingers crossed, coming up. I just wonder if there's anything that you want to say to the public, to our residents, about sort of having a safe summer, and anything that you want them to keep an eye out for, make sure.
Yeah, sure. Let's hope post-pandemic that this summer is going to be a much more enjoyable one than we've had in recent years. And of course, the Jubilee celebrations is just fantastic, isn't it? I mean, with the Epsom Derby, I'm really hoping that Her Majesty does make it to the Epsom Derby. We saw that she'd made the horse show over the weekend, and I'm hoping that we do see her in Surrey as part of those Jubilee celebrations. I know there'll be lots of street parties going on and great community gatherings, and I would ask really just one simple thing, and that's to look after each other and be really great neighbours. Let's pull together during these summer celebrations, as we did during that very early wave of the pandemic, where we saw actually really exceptional levels of public space sort of safety, people really being thoughtful to each other. If we can do that, then it would be a big help for policing, because of course we have lots of additional resource demands for all of these events. So if you can help look after each other, then that I know that the teams would really appreciate that.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think that's a fantastic note to end on, which is to look after each other. I'll be out and about throughout the Jubilee weekend, attending street parties and festivals throughout the county. And I know that others and colleagues will be as well. So thank you to Deputy Chief Constable Nev Kemp, Chief Constable Gavin Stevens, my Deputy Ellie Vasey-Thompson, from myself, Lisa Townsend, your Police and Crime Commissioner. Let's end it on that. Look after each other and keep safe. Thank you for watching.